Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Bristol Brownfield Group webinar on MMC, Risks, Relevance and Reward. Quick bit of housekeeping. As many of us are currently working from home, working remotely, there's going to be high demand on internet connections, so we're going to mute microphones and keep videos turned off. If you'd like to submit a question during the webinar, then please do. Use the Q&A tab on the white panel to the right of the screen. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible at the end, and if you encounter any issues during the presentation, then do please refer to the Big Marker support page. So, without further ado, MMC seminar hosted by the Bristol Brownfield Group, a group comprising Arup, Alderking and Foot Anstey, a consortium of expertise and support for brownfield development, recognising that early involvement of experts and collaboration is essential for brownfield development. So what is MMC? I think it means different things to different people. To some, it's old hat, prefabs to precast, bathroom pods to roof trusses, and after all, we're constantly innovating through use of low carbon technology, composite materials, and the likes of BIM. For others, have seen and heard lots about MMC, reading about it in the trade press, know it's something they should be all over, but wonder perhaps what it is exactly. Is it just off-site manufacture, or is it more than that? As a lawyer and somebody who, I guess, trades in words, I sought to consider the meaning of modern as an adjective relating to the present times. As a noun, one who advocates or practices a departure from traditional styles or values. So thinking about the present time, then I thought MMC is about embracing all that is modern. It's about decarbonisation, digitalisation and big data, affordability. Yes, it's about the trend being a la mode, but it's also about automation, high tech, perhaps also personalization, and now more than ever, it's about agility, adaptability, and resilience. In terms of departure from the traditional, I think one has to consider what is the traditional in materials, brick, block, tile, methods on-site, all weathers, tradespeople, manual labour, and funding and procurement, S-curves, golden brick payments, the JCT form of contract and myriad collateral warranties. And so MMC, I think, is about advocating and practicing a departure from all of that. But most importantly, it's about doing so in a way that delivers value, that's innovative, and that leads to improvement. So wherever you are on the spectrum, hopefully today's webinar is going to provide some insight, some food for thought, and stimulate some debate. And so, without further ado, we will move to our first speakers, who are Dan Haynes and Richard Young of Keepmoat Homes. Dan is Regional Managing Director and Richard is Technical Director. Over to you, Dan and Richard.
Morning all. Thank you, Ian, for that introduction, and thanks for having us. It's a pleasure to be here. Hopefully everyone can hear us okay, and we don't suffer too many technical hitches, but we wanted to fire in to today's session by just giving an overview of what we want to talk about this morning. You'll forgive us, I hope, for talking a little bit about Keepmoat to start off, to give an introduction of who we are and what we do. We then want to talk a little bit about why MMC is something that we've chosen to adopt and some of the things that are driving the MMC agenda. And then Ben at Alderking has given us the free license to talk about our experience, warts and all, with lessons learned from delivery, and we'll focus in on two schemes that hopefully will give you a good flavour of that. So firstly, a bit about Keepmoat. I'll keep this brief, but we're a top 10 UK house builder. By volume, we build circa 4,000 homes a year at present, and we're a 5-star builder according to NHBC results, which is something we're really proud of. We target the first-time buyer market primarily, with our average sales price across the UK of 160,000. In our patch, which is the southwest region, we're probably close to 220,000 as an average sales price. Our key USP, if you like, is our partnership approach to development. We like working with local authorities, Homes England, RPs, as well as private landowners to bring forward development in a way that really emphasises that partnership approach. So why are we interested in MMC? I mean, these arguments are well rehearsed, I'm sure, but fundamentally it comes down to speed of delivery, a quality of product. We're seeing increasing political pressure through land tenders to introduce MMC product to our mix. Well-documented industry capacity constraints, aging workforce, and some well-trodden arguments around a requirement to change the way in which we produce housing. And increasingly, we're seeing on the ground a real growth in appetite from RP partners and local authorities to deliver MMC product. Our experience of MMC is largely through an ongoing partnership that we have in place with Ilke Homes, who I'm sure people will know about. Ilke have the same equity provider in their business as we do, being TDR, and the two schemes we'll talk about this morning speaks of our delivery of Ilke Homes across those sites. Those two examples, the first of which is the Parade down in Bridgwater. For those who know Bridgwater, this is the former cattle market site, which we acquired in 2019. We secured a planning consent for 100% traditionally built product and sought to vary that planning consent by the introduction of some Ilke units for the following reasons. We had a target to increase productivity in a particular financial year, and Ilke and the introduction of MMC offered us the opportunity to deliver what we thought would be an additional 23 units by that year end, which for us was a big boost for our business. We had pre-sold those units to an RP partner, and that was the target, to deliver those units. The reality was that issues in production meant that whilst units were delivered to site in time, the MMC dream didn't necessarily come to fruition, in that those issues led to a delay in that delivery of the product. We had a very patient RP client on board, but because of some issues in respect of membranes fitted in a factory a long way away needing to be replaced on site, actually we suffered a significant delay with that project. So we're being open, as requested by Ben, warts and all. That's one example where, whilst the finished product is actually very good and we're very pleased with it, the speed with which we hoped we would deliver delivery didn't quite come about. Moving on to a live project. Brue Farm is a site which we are working in partnership with Homes England on. It's got a planning consent for 123 units. These photos are live from site 2 weeks ago now. And we have commissioned Ilke to deliver all 123 units on site, with 3 units modules now standing on site. We're pursuing a deal with an RP for an oversale of a number of those units, yet to be concluded, but we're pushing hard on that. I'm hopeful this is where the tech isn't going to let us down, but we've got a video to show. These are units going in live, sorry, not live. There are units being delivered today, but this is a video of units being delivered to site last week. Hopefully the tech will work with us, and we should shortly see a video coming up on screen. For those of you who haven't seen modular delivered to site, it's a fascinating process. You'll see the traditional buttress scaffolding in place, with the craning in taking place, obviously watching that very carefully from a health and safety point of view. But I'll skip to the next slide. That actually showed something going slightly awry with the install, but just shows the tight margins within which we're working, and the rigor with which we need to plan these things. I'm going to pass over to Rich now, who's going to talk through some of the lessons learned from a more technical side.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to give you a kind of high-level view, really, of our experience, really, with volumetric in Ilke. I've broken it down to 5 key areas. So, without further ado, so whilst it sounds quite obvious, site location and the due diligence of that site location is quite important. First question you've got to ask yourself is can it actually be delivered to site? With a volumetric system, these things come on the back of a low loader, and whether it's rural or urban, you can see it can have some issues. Actually getting a modular piece of equipment down a country lane can prove a problem, but equally so in an urban setting, we know of sites where they've had to take down 30 or 40 streetlights and traffic signals to actually get it down the street. So there is quite a little bit of thought that needs to be done. That sort of assessment would normally be done by the manufacturer, a particular assessment. So one of the first things if you're considering it, just make sure that assessment's in hand and you can actually get the kit to site. Access to the site itself, there is a habit sometimes of getting onto site early and getting foundations in, and site access is coming a little bit later. Well, when this kit turns up, it's turning up on 3, 4, 5 low loaders at a time. And so you've got to, 1, get into the site, and 2, get the low loaders back out of the site, plus the crane. So it does need quite a bit of infrastructure that needs to go in to get yourself in that place in the first place. And you're not going to get any thank yous from the police or the local highways authority if you manage to go and clog up the road outside your site with a pile of low loaders. So there is quite a few bits of logistics you have to get in place first before you can consider it. Approvals. There's many approvals on the market in various shapes or forms, and most of the off-site manufacturers have a BOPAS approval. The system or the approval has to be relevant to what you're doing here, because, for example, where we have been using Ilka and they have a BOPAS approval, originally when we did Bridgwater, it didn't have their NHBC system approval, which has a different set of approval parameters. Whilst that is now in place, and Ilka are only one of 3 companies with the NHBC who have a full volumetric system approval, there are going to be idiosyncrasies in these approvals and warranty requirements. So there are limiting factors to what the system can and can't do. The Ilka system works incredibly well on a very flat site. Put on a sloping site, it has some limitations. So it's really, what we would push here is look at the system approval very, very closely and see exactly what is being required and what are the limiting factors to that. Any off-site manufacturer that you engage with, I always say the first question you're asking for is, what is your certification, and can I see a copy of your system approval, please? Building control and warranty. We engaged as early as we possibly could, actually, with particularly on our sites with the NHBC, because it's a new system, it's a new way of doing things, and we all actually, for the last year and a half, we're learning how to actually install and get this equipment to site and make sure it hits all the standards. So we engage very, very early, and not just with the building control surveyors, we actually with the inspectors, because it's a whole system of approval and inspection as well that needs to be resolved. I would advocate every time if you can have face-to-face meetings with the warranty and building control providers, subject to obviously COVID at this present time, it will be an absolutely godsend for you. In terms of actually turning up on site and the warranties, it's a new way of building. This is just to probably put it into context. In theory, when an Ilka house lands, it's plus 4 weeks to CML, which you take that from a traditional build, that could be plus 18 weeks from having your oversight complete. So there's a lot of things that have got to happen very, very quickly, or actually even before the house is delivered. So a number of things need to be looked at. But again, I can't emphasize enough early engagement with your warranty and your building control company, and just again check if there's any gaps within the system approvals and what the warranty is requiring you to do. Foundations. This is something we had quite a bit of problem with, starting with Bridgwater, where we were building on an old landfill site. So we had ground gas problems straight away. Ground gas generally isn't dealt with within an MMC frame, it's dealt within the foundation. So it's a whole different way of how the actual system lands. An Ilka house, for example, has the whole ground floor in it. So this thing drops directly onto the foundations. So there's a number of things we need to look at. Top of concrete is only a block course down for finished ground level, which is not the norm, because the actual house sits proud. So there's something to look at there. Subfloor ventilation is through the frame, so you could easily block yourself in with a bunch of foundations is in. Again, and road and access and egress, again, needs to be considered in all of these pieces. I would always challenge the assumption of what the MMC supplier is telling you. For example, at Brue Farm, which you can see the foundation planner section on the presentation, we reduced the size of our foundation by 100% because we didn't agree with what we were being told. So all I can suggest is look at it in a different way. It is very different putting a traditional foundation in, but I would advocate that any consultant team you apply to any MMC site, they are familiar with that system because they all have their different idiosyncrasies. Whilst the foundation gives you what you're sitting on, you've got to look very carefully what's going around these things. The level of detail you require, how you interface with paths, drives, gardens, again, is very, very different to a traditional build. And again, as always, engage early with building control. The final point I haven't got a slide on actually is to do with utilities. Again, it's a kind of reversal here. You have to have all your services live at the point of delivery. So your electricity, your gas, your meters are all in, sitting there waiting for this house to turn up, which is not normally the case. So all your meters have to be remote from the building because the building's not there when you make them live. So there's pillars and all sorts of plinths that need to be constructed. And on that screenshot, you'll see a nice cyan color. That's the electricity meter plinth that's sitting remote to the building. Each water and gas electricity supply in each region has a different way of putting their meters in. So again, you need to engage early with all of the suppliers and the building control again. What we found was quite key was a services coordination meeting with all of these suppliers and ILCA and the NHBC to make sure everybody was on the same page. That'll be me, and I'll pass you back to Dan. Thank you very much.
That's great, thank you. Thanks, Richard. Sorry, Dan, to interrupt.
Sorry, I'll be super quick. Just summarise what we've run through. Clearly the devil is in the technical detail, and Richard's dived into some of that there. Really early engagement, as Richard stressed. We have found, and a word of warning, that mixed MMC and traditionally constructed sites have been very difficult to manage, lots of interface issues, and we would probably urge, if dipping toe into MMC, that you consider a 100% MMC site in the first instance. In our experience, I think it's wise to plan for and expect delays with MMC systems, particularly still in their infancy. A word of warning again, customer care and defect management, make sure you explore that in detail with your provider early on. And the final comment, which is a question as much as a comment, but there is a question, I think, as to the suitability for MMC and private open markets at the moment, given that market absorption question and the speed with which product coming to ground can be taken up by an end user. We'll wrap it up there. Sorry, we've overrun it.
Thank you very much. That was very, very interesting. Thank you both. That's very good, and thanks for participating this morning. Hopefully more from you both in the Q&A session at the end. So moving right along, next slide. Next presentation, we're going to hear from Sam Stacey. Sam is Challenge Director, Transforming Construction at UKRI. So Sam is leading the Transforming Construction Challenge, a £170 million research and innovation investment, matched by another £250 million from industry, creating high-performing, cost-effective buildings for the UK and beyond. Linked to the construction sector deal, the programme includes active building centres supporting the wide-scale rollout of energy-positive buildings, the Construction Innovation Hub to propagate standardised building products and processes. Before joining UKRI, Sam was Director of Innovation, Industrialisation and Business Improvement at Skanska UK, has been trustee of the BRE, Chairman of the National Platform Construction, and also worked for Waits and Brue. He's a chartered structural engineer with an MBA from Henley, degrees in civil engineering, architecture and philosophy. Over to you, Sam.
Thank you very much, Ian. So I'm going to talk about the Transforming Construction programme. And my first slide is, if you can see the top of it, a system that isn't working for anyone, it says there. But I should say, I absolutely love the industry, and I'm really proud of a lot of stuff that we do already. But at the same time, there is a lot that needs fixing. There's the energy issue, there's the congestion issue, the transport infrastructure, and indeed, we have got some very poor performing homes as well. And in amongst it all, we've got this, you see that pie chart there, an enormous amount of wasted effort in the construction industry. So that's both a problem and an opportunity. So what's the villain of the piece? We really identify it as a system that's focused on cheapness rather than value. So targets that can't be delivered within the current workforce is one of the problems. Slim margins prevent innovation, and overall a built environment that doesn't meet society's needs. So with the Transforming Construction programme, we're implementing 3 big changes: procurement based on lifetime value, and working really closely with all the government departments that are procuring buildings to change that. Developing and implementing modern methods of construction, and then making sure that we're sharing and scaling best practice across the industry. You know, we have to have big uptake for what we're doing, otherwise, you know, we're not going to get the impact that we need. So the components of what we're doing are this. Ian mentioned it at the beginning. We've got this unprecedented contribution from government, 170 million of government funding to help this on its way. The industry committed at the beginning of this programme to invest more than the government is investing in this. And we're seeing really good signs in terms of the industry getting on board. Dan mentioned it already. Ilke Homes and Keepmo are good examples of getting on board with this. It's a 4-year program, and we're about halfway through it. So already starting to get a sense of how it's working. But the ultimate aim here is that we change the industry for good, a sustainable model. The targets for us really are based on the 2025 construction targets that are identified by the government and the CLC in 2013. So that's a third lower costs, 50% faster delivery. Overall for the built environment, half the carbon emissions, but bearing in mind we've got to get to net zero carbon by 2050 as it stands. And then a 50% improvement in the balance of trade, improvement in exports. But I can't speak about all this without mentioning COVID, and it actually turns out, I think, not by coincidence, that what we're doing is really good in terms of making us resilient and able to respond to COVID. So the CLC and the government have worked together along with many industry players to come up with this plan for recovery from COVID for the industry. There's the short-term restart phase, getting sites up and running again. Then there's the reset phase, defining the pipeline and addressing some productivity issues. And then moving into the sort of longer-term transformation of the industry, which is really what we've been working on with transforming construction. So I mentioned a little bit about what we're doing in the first 2 areas. But it's worth pointing out that already we've got feedback along the lines of what we're doing with regards to transforming construction, and modern methods in particular is really helpful in terms of dealing with a crisis such as COVID. So on the slide here, this is Mark Reynolds, the Chief Executive of Mace, and he's saying that while on-site productivity is down, where modern methods of construction are being used, really they're not seeing any impact from COVID, which is phenomenal, really, a really outstanding result, I think. In terms of responding to the recovery plan in hand, we're doing a little bit right at the front end in terms of getting sites back up and running again. So really rolling out and ramping up systems that don't require people to touch surfaces and handle things so much. So, site access through face recognition systems and more digital logistics. Then in terms of the productivity phase and also adapting to remote working, with the BIM solutions we've got and are implementing are really helpful. So, less bandwidth in terms of sharing big files, remote site visits through cameras and LiDAR and virtual reality and such like. So solutions really across a wide spectrum. And again, working with some really good innovative companies. Things to flag here. BAM are a partner on this, working with 3D Repo, an innovative SME, and Mapix as well. But then in terms of the long-term program, it's about this real shift to a manufacturing approach for buildings. So a key partner here has been the architects and multidisciplinary practice Bride & Wood, who are leading on implementing a platform approach to the industry. So the little chart on the left of the screen there shows how we've identified different building types and how we can come up with a common component set and defined interfaces between those components for a wide range of building types. So you won't be able to read the writing on that little chart on the left there, but that covers schools, hospitals, homes, and such like. The other square on that chart there is to do with warehouses, which is a slightly different category and not the bulk of the industry. So this manufacturing approach is about defining the components and the interfaces and standardizing the processes which we use to assemble them. And the likes of Keep Moat and Ilka and other MMC providers are very much applying these techniques. And with regards to our program, we're seeing some really good results with the where we've applied this. So working with Landsec and Easy Space, we've got this kit of parts approach to offices, and that's a project that's been piloted already and is now on site with a £70 million office block in South London. So already indications are 10% capital cost reduction, 30% less materials, and 15% shorter program. So that's just a start on this sort of journey towards these more ambitious targets that we've got. And we're doing the same sort of thing with housing. So Barratt and L&Q amongst a rather astonishing 120 partners working on advanced industrialized methods for the delivery of homes. And again, all these techniques are showing fantastic results. Something to flag up here is just the approach to collaboration that we're seeing in relation to these things. So really moving away from this beat up all the supply chain and competitively tender everything to a much more collaborative arrangement. There's been in the past, I think, fear that without competition at every level, you're going to get inflated prices. In reality and in experience, the opposite is true. If you take a collaborative and partnering approach, you do all the things you want. You bring down the costs, you improve the speed of delivery and such like. And we're doing a great program with the DFE with regards to schools. So, they've got a big program of schools procurement, several billion, getting economies of scale into that, these industrialized techniques that we're talking about, and weaving the energy positive technology into schools delivery so that the next generation of schools will be net zero carbon emissions in use and minimizing the embodied carbon in the fabric of the buildings. And I can't speak on this webinar without mentioning what we're doing with regards to demonstrators in the Bristol area. So we've got this big demonstrator project in Bristol involving 460 homes across 9 sites with 9 providers of homes. So various logos here, Bukluk and Project Utopia, Legal and General, ZPods, a wide range of organisations that we're working with to demonstrate in Bristol how modern methods of construction are successful. So coming to the end of my presentation here, ultimately what's fantastic about what we're doing here is we're bringing together so many parts of the system to produce benefits for really all involved. This is absolutely not a net zero gain program. This is going to benefit owners of buildings, the users of buildings, the industry players, the companies operating in the industry, and then wider across the economy in terms of supporting jobs and local enterprise, and obviously environmental benefits, really key to this. So where we are today is we're coming out of the COVID crisis. We've got some really powerful solutions to address this. We've got very favourable political wins in terms of build, which I'm sure everybody has been listening to these messages coming out of the government. So, you know, I feel very optimistic about the future of our industry and how we can use modern methods to further our aims. On that, I'll hand back over to Ian. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sam. Yes, lots of enthusiasm there, and like you, I'm terribly excited about it all. So, but pressing ahead to our next presentation. So, Matt Hallisey is going to speak with us. Matt's head of strategy at modular home manufacturer Top Hat, a leader with experience in growing businesses at both Fortune 500 and startup level, having been at the heart of the growth at Top Hat from just 3 employees to a major investment by a leading investment bank in just 2 years. Handing over to you, Matt.
Thank you very much, Ian. Just very quickly, an introduction to us as an organisation at Top Hat. We were founded back in 2016, and we're now the UK's leading technology-driven modular home manufacturer. And from the course of 2016 to 2019, we were able to introduce a very significant investment from Goldman Sachs, who became our major financial backer. And it's been fantastic because we've been able to build on that foundation. And on a very sort of topical note, you know, we're supplying some homes for Bukluk, actually in the Bristol area as part of the initiative Sam just referenced. And we've also recently secured a major contract with Urban and Civic as well. And that's all on top of a really very sizable development that we've been doing in Kent for the past couple of years with lots of happy residents. Our first factory in the UK is in Derbyshire, and it can serve sites all around the country with a wide range of home types, including houses and low to mid-rise apartments. And much like, you know, what you've heard already, we can complete works in a matter of weeks. I just want to show you a few sort of images of our products, and I'll move on to the main subject of our presentation. So you can see here, this is the inside of our factory. We can do fully integrated roofs. And if you look at the image on the right, you can see at one end, that's our finishing line. So at the far end, the product comes around the corner there. And effectively, it's a box with first fix of services. And over the course of that finishing line, it goes from that quite basic state to, you know, effectively, if you were to walk into it, a fully complete home. You know, the electric's not yet connected, and nor obviously is the water. But if you went in, it would look like a home you could move into, and it's shipped to site that way. So when you think about what type of modular approach we're taking, what type of MMC approach, we're what it's called Category 1 in the report for MHCLG. But essentially, it's do as much as you possibly can in the controlled environment of the factory, and do as little as possible in the less well-controlled environment on site. Moving on to site, I mean, I think we saw a module being lifted before. I think most modular providers have got this bit sorted out now. It's not too hard. Once you get the right specialists in, we can lift and place a module in just 15 minutes. And looking at our site in Kent, one of the big differentiators for us at Top Hat is our design and our ability to do all sorts of types of homes. So we're not just doing social housing or just doing any particular type of housing. We can do high value private sale homes, which is this product in a conservation area with listed buildings and listed elements around the homes, all the way down to more affordable social housing product. And we can do that for homes, and you can see here in these images 2 to 5 bed homes of quite a range, and also low to mid-rise apartments as well. But what I wanted to talk about today, you know, in a slight change of pace to one or two of the other presenters, is at Top Hat, we embrace manufacturing, as you saw in our production line there. You know, those modules really move. We get a lot of work done, and that takes a really high degree of organization and focus on quality, the same as everyone else in the industry. But to really try and understand, how do you deliver that? It's one thing to say, I've got a kit of parts and I can assemble these in very standardized ways to achieve an outcome. But what does that mean in reality when you're actually looking to deliver it? So I'd like us to consider a scenario, and this is one floated by Savills actually in a report they did last year on industrial units and modular use of them. If we're to assume an increase in modular homes output of up to 50,000 in the UK, which is certainly where the industry needs to be looking to really have a really sizable impact on the UK home market, then, and if that's delivered from 40 modular factories, which was where Savills estimated it, then each factory needs to deliver 1,250 homes each year on average in order to hit that level of output. What does that mean for factory operations? And this is where things get interesting. Each home typically is going to have 1,000 plus components. Now, there's things you can do to reduce that by bringing in items that have had greater sub-assembly performed and things like that, but it's going to be something in that region, so a very significant figure. In order to hit your 1,250 homes per day, you need to deliver 4 homes each day. You know, and that includes completed designs, right? If you could output, you know, these aren't cans of beans. They do need at least some variation, you know, for across a lot of homes. Otherwise, you end up building very identikit type developments, which is obviously not good for the urban form. And that's an area we focus on a lot at Top Hat. But the net output of this is you're processing 4,000 components per day in a constrained environment. They need to come through the door. They need to be taken to exactly where they need to go on the floor to be ready. And then they need to be ready at line side when that product is ready, when that component needs to be consumed. That is an enormous organizational effort. And that's why I say when we talk about modular, there's a lot of focus on the physical parts that go into the product, the way in which the product's driven down the road, you know, a bit of the finishing work on site. The real value in this business and this entire sector is your ability to organize that component flow from design through to incorporation of the product all the way through to the end customer. And that's why the focus really needs to be on technology. Now at Top Hat, we're pursuing level 2 5D BIM and on an Autodesk platform. We've also implemented SAP, which is the enterprise resource planning software of choice for the largest organizations that do manufacturing in the world. And we view that as the key platform from which we can build in order to build a scalable business that can make a significant dent, you know, in that sort of 50,000 figure that we talked about, and allow MMC to grow. One of the challenges I think the industry is going to have for organizations that haven't embraced that approach is when you want to do then more factories, you want to do a lot more, you know, engage in a lot more growth, the organizational challenge that you face becomes much greater. And that lack of standardized process as embodied within your technology and your systems and your approach is going to become quite a challenge to grow. And that's why we've really taken that approach. So really, I mean, that's that from me really. I'm going to pass back to Ian to introduce our next speaker, and thank you for being here on the webinar.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you. Yes, I think agree absolutely. That move to manufacture, I think, is going to require a bit of a shift change, a step change rather in the industry. But I think it's a challenge, but also hopefully a fantastic opportunity. Moving on then, our next speaker, Graham Sibley. Graham is Head of Market Development at NHBC. Graham has many years' experience in infrastructure and housing sectors, leading stakeholder engagement for commercial organisations and industry bodies. Previously head of communications at the Institution of Civil Engineers, Graham now leads NHBC's engagement with growth markets in new home development, working with investors, developers and operators in the build-to-rent, later living and affordable housing sectors. Graham regularly speaks at conferences and webinars such as this, industry forums on risk management and asset protection, as well as working with lenders, investors and developers on building confidence in homes built using MMC. Over to you, Graham.
Thank you, Ian, and thanks to the previous speakers who've set me up quite nicely, actually, to almost put a summary together of a lot of the issues which they've talked about. And why they're important. I'd like to give a 10-minute snapshot of the key points that we need to consider to build confidence in MMC for use in new homes. Because whilst there's definitely a real upsurge in interest and enthusiasm for use of MMC, one of the concerns is there is still some lack of confidence in the durability, the performance of those homes, and we've got to work together to overcome those issues and build that confidence. Bit of background on NHBC. For those that don't know us, we are a leading warranty provider for new homes, warranty and structural defects insurance. We've been around for well over 80 years, and that's something that gives us a lot of data, a lot of experience from what we've seen go wrong. Because ultimately, if something goes wrong in our home, a claim is made. We need to understand what that is and to identify how to eliminate and mitigate those issues. So we're driven by increasing and improving new home quality and providing asset protection and insurance to asset owners and protectors in particular. So really, to give that context, our view is that we do need to build confidence, not just amongst manufacturers, developers, builders, but really it's lenders and valuers, investors, building operators and homeowners need to understand and be assured that new homes built using MMC and innovative construction really do have durability. This is important because of these reasons. We see ultimately when we issue a warranty on a new home, we're signing that off to perform at least as well as a traditionally built home on the same terms. And that's the important thing, on the same terms. There must be reasonable expectations of owners, of residents, be durable and long-lasting, again, at least as traditionally built, being mortgageable on normal terms and insurable. And for RPs in particular, that they can be used as chargeable as security for future investment and borrowing. That's something we've been talking to investors in particular. That's something that they're very concerned about. So we do treat that, and we do everything we do treats it in the same way. So what I'm going to talk about is how NHBC goes about assessing innovative construction. It's important also to say that there's been a lot of focus today on modular, and actually I've got modular homes there as well. But in reality, there are many systems, many homes being built using different technologies. Panelized systems, for example, are very well accepted now. Timber frame was viewed as being innovative, very much the norm in many ways. And we also got mentioned by Sam there, Barratt using innovative construction in their terms with large block scale concrete block forms, which is now approved, accepted by NHBC as well. So what we assess is everything from in factory through transport and construction to the finished home. And these are the key things we need to assess. And really, what I'm going to get to at the end of this is a product called a service called NHBC Accepts, which actually launched yesterday, and which brings this together. So there is transparency from the manufacturing and delivery process. So we're looking at offsite. We're looking at initially what is the quality and the completeness of the design package. Design manuals need to be really going into depth about how the units are being constructed in a consistent manner. That's what we're signing off, because we're effectively switching a lot of our inspection to in factory. It needs to be specifically designed for manufacturing assembly and meet the durability methods criteria we would expect. Going on site, we really look at what the suitability for use is as well. Someone mentioned before, Keep Moat, I think, about use of modular homes on high gradient sites. We also look at what the suitability for use is on from an environmental issue, the ground type, the prevailing winds. If it's on a coastal location, that can be an issue as well. How are things coordinated on site? How are modules stored, transported, and assembled on site? We've seen examples where timber or wooden modules have arrived on site. The site hasn't been ready for them to be assembled. They've been left on site in rain and degraded, and we've not been able to accept the final home because of that. So that coordination and logistics is really important. And finally, we do a full building inspection for sign-off and structural defects warranty, as we would with any home. So whilst we accept a system for use in a home to get a warranty, we also must see that it's been constructed, zipped up, and finalled in the way that we would expect. What we also do is go on site with manufacturers and do pilot sites. So we identify what the key issues are. With ILCA, we went through a lot of history. The Bridgwater site, I recognise that very well, and we learned a lot along the way together, I think. And one of the key things there is to identify what the key points are for us to inspect on site, because as you can imagine, a standard building inspector or surveyor from an HBC is used to seeing brick and block. He comes and sees an ILCA home or any other modular home, and he's not quite sure what to do. Well, our piloting, working with the manufacturer, identifies the key inspection methods for that specifically. Now I'm going to drill down just into durability, and these are the key performance factors. It's important to say we look for a design life of materials of at least 60 years in use. Inherent durability and load bearing of materials is essential. We're looking for certified performance for thermal, acoustic, and in relation to fire, and also resistance to moisture. Is there added protection if needed? Is there mitigating factors should water actually get into the building that could degrade timber or steel? And that's important to us as well. And as I say, we don't take anything for granted here. And one of the things NHBC asks for is independent assessments and verification of materials performance, looking at those bodies for certification and others. In particular on fire, we were looking for materials that meet regulations, but we're also looking for design features, particularly on like modular, that enables fire safety, that we have, especially in the roof and under module voids, that there is sufficient barrier inbuilt as well. A few lessons we've seen along the way, because there's no doubt there is a lot of quality improvement can be made using off-site. But here's some examples I'll just quickly show. The pipe work you see there, that's actually plumbing in a modular home, which basically had inexperienced plumbing engineers trying to fit that. And it just shows that if things are not, guides are not adhered to on a sufficient basis and skills are not correct in the factory, things can still go wrong. Equally, the middle one there is that shows the silver screw is the length that should have been used. The brass one is what was actually used, and you can see that in factory issues are being built in that you wouldn't necessarily see because design and production is not being delivered to the right way. And finally, that right-hand side is actually underfloor timber close to ground, actually on ground, and as you can see, water has got into the void and has degraded the timber, and that's why we do have a very strong line on timber on or underground. Just a couple more. The left hand there is on-site construction quality and auditing and control. There we had modules that were not being welded to the specified requirements. Again, people not trained, not enough control on site. We identified that and it was mitigated. The middle one there is the membrane, which was with the modules. The modules were fitted together. Someone came along and thought, that looks a bit messy. It was overhung for a reason. It was messy. They cut it out, and obviously that has now potentially degraded the structure. And finally, tolerances there. That it really is a pigeon sticking out from that. There was room for a pigeon to actually nest through, where that should have been absolutely flush to the floor. And I think it was mentioned before about tolerances that need to be adhered to. So where are we? As I say, yesterday we went live with a system called, or a service called NHBC Accepts, and that gives, as I said, transparency of what a manufacturing system performs to. These two documents, which are now available online, I'll give the email address in a second. These identify all of the requirements that we are looking for and would be documented from any manufacturer before we would be able to sign accept that system. It really goes into a lot of detail there, and also it shows the certification which we asked for. So what is NHBC Accepts? That's now live. It's aimed at building confidence. There are already around 45 systems accepted. Quite rightly before, I think Keith mentioned that 3/4 modular are available, are accepted by NHBC. We are talking to an awful lot of others though. So if you don't see it, so the full list of accepted systems is on that website. If you don't see something you're heard of or looking at, please give us a call, because there's a very good chance we'll actually be talking to them already. So that's all I have to say at the moment. Back to you, Ian.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed, Graham. Always great to see a few when things go wrong photographs, particularly like the one with the pigeon there. That's very good indeed. Thank you. Okay, the graveyard slot falls to me. I think we're doing not too badly on time, maybe a couple of minutes. I may eat into, if I may, the Q&A, but I think we've allowed a good sort of 15 minutes for Q&A, plus we're answering them online at the moment for those who are filling in on the Q&A panel. So before I start, just a quick name check to my colleague Surya Edwards, who some of you, certainly some of the panel members will know, some of you watching the webinar from home or the office will know, is more than just a sort of an observer, but a commentator and participator in MMC, and has a great deal of expertise here at Fortansti, and was going to be presenting with me, or possibly even instead of me, when we were going to run this a few months ago, and then we hit lockdown, and Surya has since had a lovely baby boy, so may join us for some of the Q&A at the end, but I'm afraid you're stuck with me. So, adoption of technology, innovation, departure from the traditional, all of these things I mentioned earlier can of course all provide rewards, but they do require planning, as one may be less able, or it may even simply not be advisable to rely on tried and tested methods, and importantly, tried and tested market terms. And so I'm going to run through a list of matters that one might need to consider carefully, to reassess even in embracing MMC. It's not an exhaustive list, and I don't have all the answers because I'm not being paid. I only give the answers when I'm paid. In the context of one's contracts and procurement. So first, the brief. What is it that you want to build, to fund, or develop? What is the MMC element? Is it required as part of the funding conditions? Is there a brief setting out core objectives? And importantly, is there another agreement, such as a development agreement or funding agreement, that's going to dictate that procurement procedure? Taking these things into account at the very outset of a project, planning is hugely important before one gets the correct contractual structure. In terms of the contract itself, you may already have a preferred approach to contracting, whether it's traditional, it's design and build, maybe it's framework, maybe it's even alliancing. If it's D&B, can the MMC contractor be the main contractor? Can they take on that single point design responsibility? If not, if they're a part of the supply chain, is the main contractor willing and able to take on that risk of supply, the interfaces that were mentioned by some of the speakers there? Is your preferred route JCT design and build? Is it with named subbies? Is it NEC3 or even NEC4, an alliancing form of contract? We're seeing the FAC1 form of contract as something bespoke. The important point from me is that I spend far too much of my time and clients' money renegotiating terms where the contract wasn't reflective of the practical realities of the project. So it's about making sure those terms are fit for their purpose. And finally, is there a funder involved, an external funder? And if there is, what's their checklist? Do they require the myriad collateral warranties? Are you going to be able to get collateral warranties from a modular manufacturer? The project team. Who else have you appointed? or do you intend to appoint, and on what terms? Most importantly, this is about capturing value that can be achieved from those early engagement, whether it's designs or surveys, capturing that value for the long term, making sure it's there and available for the project participants. The supply chain, are you the MMC manufacturer, or have you identified the manufacturer even at the early stage? What does the supply chain look like? How integral are the key members of the supply chain to the profitability of the project? And we've heard how sometimes when things go wrong, one should be planning with MMC a little bit more, floating the program, etc. Can you easily substitute those who are providing the modern methods of construction, whether it's off-site manufacturing or a particular piece of kit that's being incorporated, it's panelized? Can you substitute one for another? And even if you can do that practically, can you do it legally? Have you allowed for assignments, novations, and those sorts of important interfaces? Is it a national or an international supply chain? If it's international, what laws will apply? In traditional construction, everybody's turning up on site, we're delivering. Clearly, we're bringing goods in perhaps from countries outside of the UK, but if manufacture is going to be carried out, if the real place of performance is not the UK, might you have to anticipate that other laws will apply? And then again, about capturing that value, it may be beneficial where there's off-site manufacture in particular to use early contractor involvement, to have letters of intent, some other method of contractual engagement and capturing that value and reflecting the risk that the parties have agreed. On to payment. What's the payment profile? One would, again, thinking more traditional construction, one thinks of an S-curve, not so much done on site at early doors, then the big spike in payment, and then tails off towards the end. But as we move towards something that's a more manufactured process, are we going to see more typically something more like an R-curve, heavy early investment and payments? Or does it go the other way and actually manufacturers, the MMC manufacturers, might be able to provide credit terms and amortize the capex over a longer period of time? How is one going to capture that contractually, particularly in the likes of a JCT? Have you considered the payment structure against the attitude to risk? So even if you're working with a tried and tested contract, read those clauses again. If the payment profile is different, if it's front loaded, if one is receiving more value or paying out more value, is the risk profile still suitable and fit for purpose? Does one need direct payment rights to pay key suppliers and go around main contractors? Very common outside of the UK, France and Germany, direct rights. Not so common here in the UK, our English law notion of privity of contract. Ownership and risk. If you're going to be paying up front, who's going to own the products and component parts? And when? Think Law of Property Act 1925, the title to goods passing when they're incorporated in the works, etc. Think retention of title clauses with goods tied up in factories that may be elsewhere in the UK or maybe even not in the UK. Notoriously difficult to enforce. Think about having those robust terms. How does one get hold of the kit that's been paid for if title has already transferred? And who's responsible for loss or damage? Insurance and ownership. Very often decoupled in a contract where title to goods might transfer before the responsibility for risk of loss or damage to the goods. Important to consider whoever's responsible for the risk of loss or damage has that insurable interest. Make sure the transport insurance, the all risks insurance follows that risk allocation. And finally, on payment security and cash continuity, I often hear we'll go for a PCG or a bond. We don't need both. We'll have one or the other. They're just the same. Maybe interchangeable if all one's looking for is a pot of cash, but will cash do? Is it really product and performance that you need if things go badly wrong, in which case a bond may not suffice? Design fitness for purpose. The age-old problem in traditional in D&B contracting because of peculiarities of English law and Scots law and Northern Irish law, the risk that general contractors might take on a fitness for purpose obligation where they don't really want to or they're not insured to. But as we move towards something that's more akin to that design, as when buildings achieve what one might typically refer to as practical completion, need to meet certain performance criteria, testing, commissioning, these are fitness for purpose obligations. One either passes the tests and meets the requirements, or one doesn't. And so we may see a bit of bumping up against those two concepts of fitness for purpose and the general duty of care, reasonable skill and care in our contracts as we move towards and embrace more MMC. Design, we all know about BIM, hopefully most of us know about BIM, but what other technology is being used? This is all about the big data revolution. Data being the new oil. Do we need to make sure that our construction agreements and our supply chain agreements are more robust on things like GDPR and data protection generally? And then copyright confidentiality. Who's going to own the copyright in the product? Do you plan to publicize the MMC product? Roll it out on similar schemes? Will there be software licenses required for kit that's modern and high tech? And are there any restrictions on use of that software and copyright material? And just consider any other sort of confidentiality issues when planning to deliver MMC. And finally, quality, warranty, and durability. From very practical points of view, we've seen a lot of moving the kit around. Dealers one needs specialist lifting equipment in order to, from a legal perspective, make sure that one doesn't invalidate any product warranties. Things that are not stored correctly on site. We heard Graham talking about kit that have met all of its requirements, then it gets left on site and there's water ingress and it no longer meets the warranty requirements. It's not the warrantor's problem, it's the contractor on site or the owner or developer. And also, you know, as we move from that traditional and we embrace a more manufactured product, we have to ask ourselves, is the traditional approach to defects liability still fit for purpose? You know, a typically 12-month defects period, then 6 to 12 years latent defects. Do we need something else? This is manufacturing perhaps more than it is building. Do we need to move towards what we typically see in a manufactured environment, where it's longer defects periods, but then a shorter cutoff point where after that there's no responsibility, or even enhanced warranty provisions like one might receive going to Currys PC World and buying white goods. The construction product, the manufactured product, come in with enhanced warranties one might have to pay for, of course, but dovetailing with things like operation and maintenance, facilities management, particularly I'm thinking in the PRS sector. And finally, it's been touched on already, insurance and quality assurance. Is the product NHBC, BOPAS, or some other accreditation? We have seen sites delivered, client then goes to sell homes and nobody can get a mortgage. And you know, these stories really are, these things really are happening out there. Even CAR, construction all risk insurance, is it going to be fit for purpose when most of the construction is being perhaps off-site and it's just installation and assembly on site? And finally, end-of-life upgrade, disposal and harvesting. Look, this is about, you know, those modern methods. It's about decarbonisation. It's about the environment. It's about all of our futures. Think about the standardization that was being talked about in some of the other presentations, the duty perhaps contractually to monitor obsolescence, the right to buy stock for spare parts. Think about the carbon impact of manufacture, installation and life cycle. Does one need to capture that contractually? Are we going to see that become more of a feature of our construction agreements? And finally, disposal and harvest. You know, again, a big, I think I hear a lot about in infrastructure circles talking about building harvesting, this idea of recycling and upgrading. The long-term view, instead of we build a building, we have a 12 months defects liability period, and then people, homeowners can, or office owners can do their own thing with their buildings. Thinking about the future and the environmental impact, I think, will be important. So that's from me. Are your contracts and procurement methods modern, or do they need to be MMC, modern methods of contracting? Presentation over. How are we doing for time? 12:07. We'll move now, I think, to the Q&A. I'll hand over, if I may, some of the other participants, people in the Bristol Brownfield Group, I think have been monitoring some of the questions. So we kind of can see also that some of the questions have been answered along the way on the Q&A board there. Are there any questions, handing over to my colleagues on the call? Are there any questions that we'd like to direct to panel members? or has everybody had their questions answered on the Q&A set on the board? It looks like we've had quite a lot of questions in. Most seem to have been being answered. Hello, Paul.
Hi, sorry, I'm struggling with the, the tech. Yeah, it seems like there's been a flurry of questions and answers on the chat function on the meeting there. So it's really interesting. I mean, certainly from my experience on various development sites, working with Arup and others, we've seen timber framing, we've seen and heard a lot about modern methods of construction, but it was really good to see Dan's presentation and the others mentioning that, you know, it's becoming more of the norm for some development, for some developers. So that's really good to see. I'd only encourage that, and hopefully Sam's research, and we can roll this out. But certainly in the southwest, I'd be keen to see this becoming more the norm. And I saw we had people from YTL and other large developers sort of on the call, so it's good to see that we're all in the same space and continuing that discussion.
I'll open this question out to anybody who'd like to answer it on the panel. Paul, you may also have a view. Modern methods of construction in brownfield development or refurb. I think Matt, I think you mentioned some work's being done on listed buildings. I think one thinks of MMC and modular, nice, if not greenfield, certainly, you know, a nice clear site and bringing things onto site. How suitable is MMC and what we're seeing in high tech and maybe you know, passive house systems? How suitable is that for that sort of refurb and regeneration, urban regeneration?
No, thanks, Ian. I mean, I think fundamentally, MMC, once the site's prepared, you know, we don't see any particular difficulties beyond a greenfield site, you know, once you've got that site prepared. So, of course, you know, with brownfield, you obviously can run into additional issues in the ground and various other things. But once that site's ready, I mean, you can do the same foundations for us that you can for other providers of greenfield housing, and therefore there's no real issue. On our site down in Chatham, that's quite interesting. It was an old military barracks, been occupied for around 3 centuries by the army, so goes quite a long way back. There's a listed building on site, a listed wall, and a heritage building as well. So, you know, with MMC, we're not quite at the point yet where we can go in and refit out a listed building with MMC. That has to be done the old-fashioned way. But the challenge more with MMC and what you're able to do is, you know, it's a very modern product, incorporates great energy performance and, you know, nice big windows and all the things that we can do with the components and materials that are available to us today. But how do you make that fit in a streetscape sense and in an architectural vernacular sense in what is a very old traditional site that is one of the most well-known locations in Chatham? And we were able to do that. There was an enormous amount of work put in designing the homes and designing the facades in particular, so that we create an integrated streetscape. And so you can have a listed building sitting, you know, on one side of the street, you know, and an MMC home on the other, and frankly, we're almost finished on the refit of the listed home right now. But just seeing how it's looking, I mean, it's looking great, and we're really pleased with the outcome on that. And what we think we're really showing is that, you know, the fact that the delivery method being MMC is not an obstacle, really, we think, to any type of delivering any type of architectural vernacular if your system is sufficiently flexible, which ours is.
I think what Matt said there really reinforces our approach and our expectations. Clearly, it's somewhat easier to apply an MMC to greenfield sites where there's you know, lots of repetition and so forth. But as we move the industry into more familiarity with MMC and different habits, and particularly where the digital techniques are more widely adopted, then I think we can see it moving quite substantially into the more complicated, as it were, sites and sectors within the industry. So I think, you know, we will see very widespread uptake, and particularly when we start to address the deep retrofit requirements to improve the carbon emissions of the existing estate. I think we will start to see big scale use of MMC type approaches in brownfield and refurb situations.
Very good. I noticed on the Q&A panel there, Martin Hoyle had asked a question, are there places in the world where MMC is mainstream? And you've replied, no country gets it quite right, but the case of residential, Japan and Sweden are leading. Where do you think we are in the UK? It seems as if we've spoken a lot on this call about the huge opportunity for the UK. Are we lagging significantly behind? Are we making great headway, or are we leading in certain areas?
Where we're great is digital. So there's been a really good story with regards to digital techniques in the UK construction industry. The government's been really supportive of that. I think people will be familiar with the 2016 BIM Level 2 mandate. So we're good there. And I think there are some really strong examples of MMC, much of which we've heard about this morning, in the UK. In terms of the level of uptake, we're not a leader at the moment. But I think one thing that where we will be better than, well, we'll see good progress is a variety of building types. So, you know, some countries are pretty strong with regards to the resi solutions, but with regards to other building types, I think the UK is going to kind of sweep in from behind and get in front. And it's interesting to see, I think it was Matt's comment about Singapore. I haven't been to Singapore, but I have heard great things about what they do in Singapore. Matt, do you want to comment?
Yeah, it's actually, I was on a panel with someone from Brue recently, and she was their global expert in MMC, and there's now a mandate that virtually all of these big buildings in Singapore have to be done using MMC, which is interesting because there's not really the facilities to actually make the modules in Singapore. They have to actually import them. But I think the main driver of that, obviously very unique situation, but it's the reduction in disruption that's key. I mean, a high-rise build in a dense city is obviously can be very disruptive, but that seems to be the key driver, you know, alongside the same things that obviously we're looking at here.
And
super.
Can I just interject as well? I think, talking about the UK market, I think we're now seeing a maturing of the production that is coming into the market with a lot more institutional investment and backing, government backing as well, and I think that's really important for the long-term sustainability of MMC. Only a few years ago, we had an awful lot of quite small suppliers coming to us with lots of ideas. There was almost a perception of it being a cottage industry. I think we're moving away from that now. We have got maturity. We've got a number of manufacturers talked about here today, the likes of the Legal and General, I'd add to that as well, who are really going to be blazing away with very substantial backing. And what we have found is to really make a product work needs deep research pockets, and they must be able to continue to be able to supply in the longer term, and so that maturity is now happening.
Super. Access to funds, the perennial problem, but hopefully, as you say, moving to a better space there now.
Ian, we heard from Graham briefly about the mortgage market. It was just a question, well, to the whole panel, but maybe Graham and Dan and Matt specifically, where MMC units are being delivered as open market units to private buyers rather than sort of pre-sold en masse to RPs. How are the main lenders reacting to this emerging sector?
I'm spending a lot of time talking to lenders and to valuers, and the things I talked about being able to lend on normal terms is really important to them. They want to be assured that the due diligence has been put in on the quality of the manufactured output and the quality of the finished home. That's what the lending market is looking for. And I mean, that's why we've gone the extra mile with what we launched yesterday, of giving the transparency of that. And we've got valuers now saying, that's great, we want to use that as part of our due diligence moving forward, that we can see that the right assessment has been put in. About 2 years ago, some lenders were talking about having different mortgage rates or different product for MMC built homes. That would have been a disaster for the market because it automatically flags up as different and with the different perceived risk. That's not happened, where lenders are now starting to look, if it's got an NHBC warranty, for example, they're very assured that it will perform and they can lend sensibly against it.
Jolly good. I think I'm going to have to draw proceedings to a close. I think we're out of time. I think what I do get a sense of, though we could talk all day, I'm sure lots of people will need to drop off our webinar. I get a sense that we might have a series of webinars in the offing here, and I think I should certainly be delighted if we were to do that, because I think there's so much more that we could speak about here. But can I just say thank you once again to the speakers, to Richard, Dan, to Sam, Matt, and to Graham, and to Paul and to Ben also for following up there with some of the Q&A. The session's recorded. If you want to get in touch with any of us, you can still use some of the links and drop us a line. We'll perhaps pick up some of the Q&A afterwards, and keep an eye out in your inboxes and on LinkedIn and what have you for perhaps the next in the series. Thank you all very much indeed, and have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.